What's up, guys? I have some breaking news for you here. America has seized the websites of a few Iranian news stations, which, if done in reverse, would of course pretty much be a declaration of war. But hey, this is America we're talking about, so no problem, right? What's perhaps more interesting than the basic facts behind this story is that America, if we're to use them as an example of a superior system and government, as they often suggest, has inadvertently validated and endorsed the Great Firewall of China. As a matter of fact, they've outdone it and have made the Chinese Communist Party look like amateurs. Press TV is one of the seized news agencies. That was initially blocked a couple of months ago by Facebook, but now the U.S. government obviously has decided that it wasn't enough, and they're just going to take over the entire domain name, along with, I think it was 35 other websites, somewhere around there. But this actually isn't the first time they've done this. Last year, they've done it as well. Over the past year, they've seized multiple domains. So we have the benefit of time behind us, and we can look at what did they finally say their reasons were, because it's still a little bit early for this one that just happened. And what it says that, this is for the past campaign, the United States seized 92 domains that were spreading disinformation, according to them, and Iranian propaganda that had the potential to influence the United States' domestic and foreign policy. So what they're basically saying is they don't trust their own population with freedom of information. They want them to remain funneled through the mainstream media narratives on foreign policy, which are strangely all pretty much aligned in the West, at least when it comes to really important issues. I'm planning to make a separate video on that topic, but I'll give you a few tools and clues on your own to better see through some of the media biases. You know, take a look at how mainstream media interviews people or organizations that support the anti-China narrative, for example. You could literally be a military-industrial complex-funded think tank that will directly profit from fear-mongering and then proceed to fear-monger, just like ASPI does, and the media will engage you as if you're an honest party, asking you meaningful questions about the narrative. Speak against the leading narrative, however, and you'll soon find yourself being asked ridiculous, superficial questions like, how does it feel to be a mouthpiece for Beijing? Pay attention to how these two different sides are engaged with by the mainstream media, and you'll discover something very, very revealing. Anyways, back to the main topic. China blocked Facebook way back when, after they refused to shut down the groups that were organizing terrorist attacks in Xinjiang. Largely speaking, you can say that they blocked a lot of websites because they were clearly operating as tools for U.S. foreign policy and interference. American support for the terrorist groups wanting to separate Xinjiang is something I've already covered, but we can just look at the fact that Facebook responded to China when they asked them to close down those groups no, that's not how things work in the West, and they refused to. Afterwards, after China blocked them, and we continue to a few years later, just last year, take a look at what they did for India. They censored criticisms of the Modi government during protests and during what was the largest strike in human history. All of human history. Ask yourself why you didn't hear too much about that, why that story died out so quickly, and why didn't you see how many of them were actually holding communist flags? That would have provoked some questions there saying, what's going on here exactly? But again, this is because you are and have always been funneled through the U.S. state-approved options for a very good reason. But what America did here was far beyond what China does in terms of just blocking websites. Not only did they prevent Americans from being able to view these news outlets, they took it away from the entire planet. They're controlling the entire global narrative. The same thing they're trying to say that China is trying to do, they're actually doing themselves. So, you know, this story, there's actually so many levels of irony to this story. And so let's just dig right into another really, really big one. Remember when they said they had to block it because it was propaganda and interfering with America? Well, unlike the news agencies that they took down, America actually operates news agencies with the very specific goal of interfering with the politics of foreign countries. That's an agency called USAGM. It owns outlets like Radio Free Asia and Voice of America. And unlike many non-Western state-owned media outlets, they don't need to put on their Twitter pages or YouTube pages that they are a state-run media outlet, despite the fact that they operate even with the specific goal of spreading propaganda and destabilizing countries. As far back as 1977, the New York Times admitted that Radio Free Asia was a weapon in a worldwide propaganda network built by the CIA. In the same article, they showed that Radio Free Asia was a propaganda weapon created 2 years after China's communist revolution to destabilize and overthrow its government. They have these channels in multiple languages for multiple countries of target, depending on the U.S. foreign policy at that point in time. So let's together listen to what Ben Sherman has to say about USAGM in a USAGM event last year.
The soft power of the United States costs almost nothing compared to our military forces and doesn't endanger our servicemen and women. That's why we prohibit these organizations from communicating with the American people, because there could be some effect on our elections.
It's a soft power Cold War tool, cheaper than the military, and they're banned for targeting U.S. audiences because it might have effects on their own people. I mean, they know full well this is psychological warfare. It's meant to mess with people. With very little evidence to prove that the news networks they seized are deliberately trying to intervene with American politics, they're actually very clearly doing the exact thing that they say should be prohibited. This goes back to what I said before about America creating a world not of international law, but of a rules-based order where they make the rules and everybody else follows them. But let's dig even down deeper into these ironies. Voice of America, part of USAGM, part of their Cold War toolbox to destabilize countries of target, also operates VOA Persian, a USAGM outlet specifically designed to act as a tool of war against Iran, directly aimed at the Iranian government while wiping out Iranian voices that undermine those efforts. What the American government has inadvertently suggested here with their supposed excuse, if we're to take it at face value, is that not only is what the Chinese government says that information designed to maliciously influence its own population should be controlled or even outright banned is true, but that America should even take it one step further and decide what the world's entire population should be trusted with or not. Malicious foreign policy aside, America doesn't really trust its own people with freedom of information and choice. I mean, after all, even if we look back to the premise of trying to impeach Trump after he was already on his way out, it was, in their own words, to make him ineligible to run again, which actually means they were afraid that there was a chance of him winning again and being reelected. They didn't trust their own public and didn't even want to give them that choice. Now that opens up a whole new rabbit hole where we could look at China's meritocracy-based system with a bit more honesty, but that's a completely different topic, which I'll probably talk about in a different video. America needs to control the global narrative. This is exactly why they needed to block TikTok as well. It's not really because they're afraid of how TikTok might influence the American public. I mean, that might be part of the reason, but more so, it's because they're afraid that TikTok won't fall in line like the American social media companies do and help control the narrative. You don't believe that's happening? You know what? I'll give you a link. Actually, I don't even know if YouTube will allow me to post it here. If it doesn't work, I'm going to add a space before the first hyphen, and you will have to remove that space yourself. This is an article written by Andrei Vilcek. He's an amazing journalist exposing the terrorist operations and campaigns against China for years. He was found dead in his car in Istanbul last year. Which is kind of weird. But anyways, let's get on to the main point. I don't want to get into conspiracy theories here. The article is talking about America's involvement with terrorists from Xinjiang. Now, this isn't a conspiracy theory. There's a lot of information in there about this. Take this link and try to post it on Twitter and see what happens. You can't. It won't let you. All right, well, how about you try to send it in a DM to someone on Twitter? You can't. It won't let you. Try posting it on your Facebook timeline. You can't. It won't let you. Try sending it to a friend in a DM on Facebook. You can't. It won't let you. You live under censorship. It's the same thing. Ask yourself, for example, when Soleimani was assassinated. the Iranian general, you didn't hear that he was on his way to a peace mission to meet with Saudi Arabia, something that could have brought stability to the region. That's because Facebook and Instagram were removing posts and people who seemed too sympathetic towards the Iranian regime. Some posts did get through, but this conversation was highly suppressed. It's the same reason you didn't see the millions of people in Iraq protesting that move. It's the reason you didn't know that the Iraqi parliament voted 170-0 to kick the Americans out after that assassination happened on their soil. And even though America was supposed to be bringing freedom, democracy, and self-determination to the Iraqi people, the U.S. response was basically, that's cute. Nah, we're staying. The whole incident got so ridiculous that Twitter even banned the president of Syria when he started talking about it. So Syrian diplomats went onto Weibo to air their grievances out, a Chinese social media website, where eventually you saw an American and an Iranian or Syrian, it was either or diplomat, arguing with each other on a Chinese platform because they didn't have the freedom to do it on Twitter anymore. I mean, how is that for outrageous and backwards from everything you imagined in terms of how things work? But what I want to say is the difference between people in China and people in America is that for the most part, Chinese people know that there's censorship in China, and they understand that there's additional information beyond the Great Firewall, which many Chinese access with a VPN, of course. Americans don't have that option or this workaround to get Iran's perspective anymore because it's been wiped off the face of the earth. Now, I will say for presstv.com, they've gone to presstv.ir. You can go check it out for yourself and see what's so scary about their news coverage. But this definitely is going to set them back in a major way. The app stopped working as well. I'm sure they've got to reconfigure that, but it's going to drop off a lot of users. But onto my main point. Americans, and actually people in the West in general, truly believe that they have freedom of press in any meaningful sense of the word. They believe that their conclusions are more valid and well-rounded than people living in a country with censorship. And that's a far more dangerous situation. Believing that you are free when, in fact, you're a frog at the bottom of a well, being manipulated, not to protect you from malicious outside information that you aren't trusted enough, fearing that you don't have the capability to see through it on your own. I mean, that might be a part of it, but more so to push a violent, brutal, and evil foreign policy, molding you to believe that you came to those conclusions on your own, softening you up for whatever next aggression, is in store. But hey, at least you're free, right? You can say whatever you want, yeah? Wrong. If you work an ordinary job, or if you want to function in society, try having a go at debunking something like the Xinjiang genocide claims. Take an honest look at it and start just pointing out a few of the issues and holes. See what kind of a reaction you get from your peers. See if your job becomes at risk. Especially if you're a journalist, as we saw with the AP journalist who lost their job because it was uncovered they belonged to a pro-Palestinian group during their college years. Step out of line on something important enough and feel how you're discouraged to speak out. This is exactly why I have countless friends from all over the world, including lawyers, who never go on record with their concerns about the validity of the Xinjiang narrative. That's a very difficult thing to do. And become big enough or influential enough, and you'll end up in superficial hit pieces like I was on Al Jazeera and SCMP, who deliberately left out the actual troubling red flags that I pointed out. You're not free. You're free to agree with the mainstream narrative, but you don't know it. And it makes you an even bigger danger to the world than any citizen who's well aware that they're sitting behind a wall of censorship. That's going to be it for me today, guys. I'll see you in the next video.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal? We do have people who submit pieces to American journals. Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks? This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
How else to explain the bizarre unanimity that we notice today of the press on certain stories that they somehow managed to get absolutely wrong over and over and over and over? I mean, I've been around for a long time, studying the media in this country for decades. I've really never seen anything like this. There's an Alice in Wonderland quality to it, because we live in a country that prides itself on freedom of expression and the marketplace of ideas. And yet we see over and over and over and over again on issue after issue, there's a certain truth that is enforced with exactly the same kind of ruthlessness and impatience with any disagreement that you'll find in countries like North Korea.
Nowadays, the CIA collaboration happens right out in the open, and the public is too brainwashed and gaslit to even recognize this as scandalous. Immensely influential outlets like the New York Times uncritically pass on CIA disinfo, which is then spun as fact by cable news pundits. The sole owner of the Washington Post is a CIA contractor, and WAPO has never once disclosed this conflict of interest when reporting on U.S. intelligence agencies per standard journalistic protocol.